Hey guys, Mark Allen, BHSpringSolutions LLC and BHSpringSolutions.com, back again for another session of High Power University. And this is also part two of BHSpringSolutions' announcement of Hubert, firearms and modifications designer, a legendary firearms and modifications designer. We've named him as BHSpringSolutions Chief Weapons and Modifications Designer. And this is a moment that we are exceedingly proud of. And I brought a little scrapbook here along for this session, but we're going to dive deeper into a subject that you might not see coming, but it really is going to be a fantastic illustration of just how special this guy is. And I want to say one thing right up front, that the fact that BHSpringSolutions in 2021 is acknowledging and recognizing a designer to the extent that we are, and aligning ourselves with Hubert to the extent that we are. This is really a throwback in history, about 100 years. And what I mean by that is Leon's position with BHSpringSolutions is very similar to John Browning's position with FN back in the teens and 20s, in like 1900 teens and 20s. Leon was a 35-year designer at FN and has a legacy of design accomplishments behind him. Some of Leon's most recent credits would be the tactical safety system for Glock pistols that BHSpringSolutions markets. It's the world's only one-piece drop-in manual safety for Glock pistols. Nobody else on the planet has ever done that. The most recent were within weeks of officially launching the new BH Advanced trigger subassembly for high-power pistols. And this is a complete redesign of existing high-power pistols trigger subassemblies. It's far more advanced. And this was Leon Hubert's collaboration with my partner Slav and myself, and it was that new trigger subassembly is a product of this alignment and of this collaboration. And I wanted to share with you just real quickly. This is a picture of Leon Hubert and myself, but I want you to point you away from the good-looking guys there to that table. That table is a partial representation of firearms that are credited, firearms or design innovations that are contained on those firearms that are all credited specifically to Leon Hubert. And very, very proud moment to have that picture taken. The High Powers Mark III's version that we started seeing around 1989, that was Leon Hubert was behind those advancements to the high power pistol at that time, as well as the SFS systems for 1911s and high powers, and a list of actually a catalog of other things that Leon Hubert has designed. And this is this is a scrapbook picture from Belgium. I think of this as the BHSpringSolutions high power vigilante picture from Liege. And these two handguns are just two that are credited to Leon Hubert. And I think the history of these is going to be quite interesting for you. And we're going to look at this from a perspective that may be very, very new and kind of fresh, but it's worth looking at in this way. I owned my first BDA 380. This is actually an FN 140DA, and it's identical except for the FN grips instead of the Browning wood grips of the BDA 380. It's a 13-round 380 caliber. John Browning designed the cartridge, and this is an original Leon Hubert design. And it also was made in tandem and in collaboration with Beretta as the Beretta 84, and then it spun off into all kinds of Beretta 80-something models, basically using the same platform, the same kind of operating system. Now, the interesting thing about this pistol is Leon designed it at FN, and FN did not have any production capacity to produce it. However, double action, single action was becoming the thing. And so they shopped it, and Beretta was in the market, and Beretta was so much in the market that I can show you, actually, you can take a look at a schematic of a BDA 380 or a Beretta 84. They're almost identical. And then take a look at the Beretta 92 that has served as the United States military sidearm for, since 1985-ish. What you're going to find is Beretta really, really went after some of Leon Hubert's technology out of the BDA 380. And this has to be a very hard lesson learned for a company like FN, because when the pistol trials in the this dates back to early 70s design era, began production in 1976, the same year as the Beretta 92, ironically, and the Beretta 84. And by the early 80s, when the United States pistol trials came around, the Beretta 92 contains design elements that they derived specifically from this handgun, and one of those things that the 92 featured in what was considered the immediate predecessor of the Model 84, or the Beretta 84. It was called a direct feed. In other words, the relationship of magazine to barrel is called a direct feed, in that there is no feed ramp between the magazine and the chamber. And this was specifically a Leon Hubert design element, and many others in the BDA 380 that mysteriously found their way to the Beretta 92. And what happened with the Beretta 92 was Beretta was working with some of their previous designs with the open slide style, and basically what they found in the FN 140DA, which became the Browning BDA 380, what they found was apparently some real superior technology that they were then able to put into the Beretta 92. So, having said that, among the firearms that we absolutely do know would not exist in their current form today, had it not been for Leon Hubert, the Beretta 92 would be a prime example. In fact, FN found themselves competing against design work of their own designer when they competed in the pistol trials in the early 1980s. And ironically, Leon Hubert was FN's representative here in the United States during those pistol trials as well. So this must have looked like sort of an exhibition, between FN's entrance into that competition as it is, and Beretta's. Leon Hubert is everywhere during this time. And the Beretta 92 becoming the United States military sidearm was actually also a tribute to Leon Hubert's design work, as well as the folks at Beretta. When I first got my hands on one of these in the early 90s, if I had not known that John Browning did not design this handgun, I would have swore John Browning designed this handgun, because there's so many things about it that are just very, very similar in the design elements, especially the design elements that showed up in John Browning's later year handguns. I want to show you a couple of things that very, very interesting about the FN 140 or BDA 380. The disassembly happens very similar to the high power. You lock the slide back, but then you have a takedown lever here, and it's very, very easy, and you slide the barrel off. Leon went with a full-length guide rod, a single recoil spring, and the full-length guide rod is one piece. Different than the high power, he mounted the slide stop on the frame, but in very, very John Browning-esque type fashion. Watch how this disassembles, and I'm not going to disassemble this all the way, but I want to show you, just like that, you lift up with the slide stop. You'd never think of this typically, but then right down in there, you can see there is a spring. So the slide stop is installed like that, and it's typically not a piece that you would take out for any reason, but when you know the combination to take it out, this is real This has echoes of John Browning because he designed things to go together and come apart, just like I showed you, without the use of tools. And as you can see, we're very easy takedown, and certainly no use of any tools or anything like that. Trigger brake on this BDA 380 is about 4 pounds in single action, about 8.5 pounds on the double action. The double action is extremely smooth. The single action is extremely excellent. Has a sufficient length barrel for getting optimal performance out of the 380 ACP cartridge. The design work on this thing is a thing of beauty. And when you put Browning wood grips on these, I've seen gun writers call this the most beautiful, aesthetically beautiful handgun ever made, and in some ways it is. Look here at the extractor. He made the extractor basically a part of the side of the slide, so it's kind of almost hidden in plain sight. It's just a beautiful, beautiful, sleek kind of a job that Leon did with this. And I can say personally, I have never malfunctioned one of these handguns, and I have shot thousands of rounds through BDA 380s, and I've never, simply just never malfunctioned one of them. That direct feed barrel is, in my opinion, not as smooth with hollow point ammunition as some other barrel designs, but you do have to understand, this was not being made for hollow points. This was being made, the market was military, police in Europe, and that was who FN sold it to. And then Browning also imported them as well. So that's one. This is a FN BDA 9. Léon Hubert also. This was one of his designs. And I want to tell you, again, this is a fantastic, fantastic handgun. Shoots real similar to a high power. It's double action, single action. Léon did some things on this, though. This, in our way of looking at design, is very John Browning-esque again. And I'm going to show you kind of what I mean. You're going to notice that slide stop. This is a high power style slide stop, but with a one piece and actually a polymer composition guide rod in it. And it's a single one piece guide rod, but you have a high power style slide stop here that is like that. This takes down in the slide forward position just like your SFS does, and then slides off like this. The recoil spring is here on a one-piece plastic, if you will, guide rod, and it's certainly more than enough. And it installs just like this. Now, the fun thing about this is, and this is just, if you're a high power guy, when you see this, this is really going to be a convincer for you, because what happens when you install this is the guide rod is pushed this way and it makes an opening for the slide stop. The end of the recoil spring guide rod there mates to this indent right there in the guide rod. So what is putting pressure on the slide stop in order to hold it in the down position? The recoil spring. So in other words, what Leon did here was he replaced a multiple piece limited life recoil spring guide rod in the high power pistol, replaced it with one piece, very easy and economical to manufacture, and it accomplishes the same thing and in far fewer parts in order to do it, because it in essence does the same job. Another thing that we wanted to show you, because this is one of the things that Leon is very, very proud of. By the time he was designing the FN BDA 9 and the BDA 380, muzzle drop safety, hammer drop safety, drop safe period had become very much a thing in the firearms design world. And Leon invented the moving firing pin retaining plate. And here's what I want to show you what that means here. Now watch as I pull this trigger. you're going to see the firing pin plate, retaining plate right here. You're going to see that moving. So when we're in this position and the trigger is not pulled, we're completely drop safe because that firing pin retaining plate is currently blocking the firing pin from going forward. So unless and until the trigger is pulled, you can beat this hammer with a sledgehammer, or you can pound this into the firearm on a rock, and the firing pin can't leave its position. It cannot go forward because it is blocked, and it's blocked from all directions. And then when the trigger is pulled, the firing pin retaining plate cams up, and this position allows the firing pin to go home to the primer cartridge. And I can tell you to this day, Léon Hubert is extremely proud of this design, because how in very, very few parts, you don't have any parts that are messing with your trigger pull that have to be moved out of the way. This is a very, very smooth operation, and it keeps this at a 4-pound single action trigger pull. And as compared to the high power, much wider, bigger extractor with a redesigned extractor spring that's really wild. Again, this is Léon Hubert design work. And as I looked at this, FN was specifically wanting a double action, single action handgun, but as I was looking at this, I was imagining things here being done, in the same way, in the same mindset as John Browning, because he has parts that are, simple and doing multiple jobs, even despite their simplicity. And the moving firing pin retaining plate, that is just like a ninth wonder of the world or something for us. So anyway, what we're going to get to about in this session is a John Browning quote: "The best gun is the simplest gun." And I want you to be able to notice that the total number of components we're going to be referring to of these FN Browning, John Browning designs, we've also added Beretta, SIG, Glock into this study. Not included in these parts totals are target sights, like rear sight assemblies that got 6 to 10 parts in them. We're not counting those as part of the firearm components. We're also not counting grip screws, and we're also not counting magazines. Holding of grip panels, if they're included on a handgun design, that is fairly universal. You have to have a grip one way or another. And magazines, you have to have a receptacle for storage for ammunition. So all of these handguns have those. We didn't count those as part of these components. Now, as I show you these totals, I want to also say that these totals were arrived at by looking at a schematic of each of these models, and or in consultation with Léon Hubert about his designs. And if you look at a different schematic or a different generation or a different model number, possibly, you may come up with a different total. And it's always possible that I could have slipped and missed a pin somewhere. But these are going to be very, 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 very close. And I want to show you kind of how this starts out. We're going to try to block the light through this and make this easier for you to see. I started out here with the model Beretta 92. That's the famous United States military sidearm. Total number of components, 68. The credited designer is Beretta. But as I told you, this handgun contains technology that came directly from Léon Hubert. Okay, we're going to continue down. And again, this idea that the best gun is the simplest gun. Browning Buckmark. This is today's Browning Buckmark pistols. 58 components. Designer, we only know Browning Arms Company. And I want to say that right here, the fact that BHSpringSolutions is on this path of recognizing designers. This is not what our major gun companies have been doing since John Browning passed away, if you've not noticed. It was almost like the gun companies learned some kind of certain lesson from John Browning, and the one thing they didn't want to repeat is they didn't want to have their designers being more famous than their companies. And John Browning, of course, he took all of the thunder in the firearms world because he remained independent. And in 2021, what we're doing here is really makes BHSpringSolutions an outsider from an industry standpoint, because by looking at what we're looking at here, it's really going to put some things into perspective for you, I think. The Browning BDM, this was a U.S.-made double action, single action that could be either double action, single action, or double action only with the turn of a screw on the side of the frame. And that had 53 components, Browning Arms Company again. And today's FN 5.7 pistol, 53 components, and we only know designer of that handgun as being FN. Okay, continuing on, in descending order, at least for this study, the FN Browning High Power Mark III. Now this would be the last generation high power that was made by FN Browning. And you see 50 parts, and the credited designers with that are John Browning, Dieudonné Save, and Léon Hubert. The FNX series. This is FN's current day double action, single action, hammer fired semi-auto plastic pistols, or polymer grip frame pistols. That's only we know of that as an FN design. There's 48 parts. Next one in descending order would be the FN Browning High Power Mark II model. That had 47 parts and did not include the ambi safety, which added a couple, and also did not typically include the extra spring under the Type 2 sear lever. And next on the list, we've got 1911-22 or 380, and this is Browning's version of a 22 caliber or 380 caliber 1911. And we say Browning Arms Company and John Browning is all we know of the designership of that particular firearm. It strays far away from the 1911's original design, of course, but we mentioned John Browning in that instance because of he started that. Okay, we call this the 44 parts or less club, and we say where legends seem to happen. And we start here, the model 1911, the original. Model 1911, 44 parts, John Browning. We see this almost like a cluster. This almost starts to look like a dope chart of that you'd use to sight in your rifle. In fact, it's almost like reliable data we start to base a conclusion on. That Browning BDA 380 or the FN 140DA we just talked about, also the Beretta 84, total 44 parts, Léon Hubert. FN BDA 9. 44 parts, Léon Hubert. There's also a compact version, the BDA 9C. It also has 44 parts, and that is Léon Hubert. And we also find in the 44 part club the original FN Browning Classic P35 with the internal extractor. It likewise has 44 parts. This is almost a like a destination of sorts, but what I want you to notice is there's very, very few designers who get under 44 parts in a modern handgun as a design feature. Let's go down the list here from here. We at 43 we have the FN model 1903. That was of course John Browning. Then there is a double action only version of the BDA 9, and it reduced 2 parts out of the BDA 9. And it's called the FN BDA 0, and that's a 42 part handgun. Again, Léon Hubert. Browning's 22 target pistol. Now, this is kind of an interesting story, and we're not going to dwell on this a long time, but this would be one example of John Browning's 22 target pistol. There was a point in FN's production of this that there were some design upgrades that were adapted and became permanent. These design upgrades were done, and to put this in perspective, FN just did not allow anybody to run around and make modifications to the master's designs. But in this case, they did deem it necessary, and it was Léon Hubert who is credited with those upgrades. No net parts were added in that design upgrades, which we give Léon Hubert the credit for the upgrades, because those were an evolution of that particular handgun's history and legacy as well. Okay, we put on here the Glock pistol with the TSSG, or the manual drop-in manual safety for Glock pistols from BHSpringSolutions. A Glock configured with the TSSG of Léon Hubert's in design and invention. That would have 38 parts. And the Glock without a TSSG has 34 parts. Now you're going to start to see how this gets somewhat interesting. We went ahead and slid the Sig Sauer P365, 32 total parts, and we only know of Sig Sauer as being designer of that particular model. Now I want you to look at the under 32 parts club. FN model 1922 had 31 parts. That was John Browning. FN model 1900 had 30 total parts. Again, John Browning. FN model 1910, the predecessor of the 1922, that was 29 parts. That was also John Browning. Your little vest pocket or 25 ACP pocket pistols, this was not the Browning baby or baby Browning we know of, but John Browning's original vest pocket pistol, 28 total parts, and that was a John Browning design. And then we've studied in High Power University to a great detail everything we can about the 1927 Grand Renderman, also known as John Browning's last patented pistol that got a patent after he had passed away. 24 total parts. Now, I want to show you a couple of things that we see happen again and again. And this really is kind of noteworthy. This was John Browning's vision of a high-power pistol, and had 24 total parts, required no tools to take it apart or put it back together, no tools to assemble at the factory even. And it, again, was a breech bolt designed semi-auto to use the same type of magazine as what the high-power pistol has. And when the P35 was designed and invented by Dieudonné Save, he went from, however he did, he went from this as a base and a platform, and the total number of parts ballooned all the way up to 44. I mean, almost doubling. And so from 24 parts to 44 parts, but notice what happens here is we're talking about technology and a design that is so superior here that even when it was passed off to another designer, which is really, really tough, because you just lack so many things when you start out with your own idea and you have the vision of how this comes out, and you kind of get thrown into it in the middle of the journey, like Dieudonné Save did. Anyway, he took this handgun, added 20 parts to it, and it became a legendary handgun called the Browning. We know it as most commonly the Browning High Power. So what I'm saying is, in spite of it not being optimal to have a guy pick up, one handgun and then design a different handgun off of that handgun, because of what you see happen here is invariably it seems like you wind up with a great increase in the number of parts. The same thing can be said for the Browning BDA 380 and the technology that is in it. Your Browning BDA 380 or a Beretta 84 has about 44 parts. Well, different designers got a hold of that technology, and from that was born the Beretta 92, but again, by adding 24 net parts to it. Personally, me, myself, and I think Beretta would have been a lot better off to have stolen Léon Hubert and got him to do their vision of a 9mm semi-auto pistol. That I don't think 24 parts would have been added. But when you think about it too, in our most recent military pistol trials here in the United States, when the Beretta was not rechosen and the SIG P365 was rechosen or was chosen, notice the disadvantage Beretta had. They have a handgun that requires the manufacture of 68 different components, and the competitor who got the contract has a handgun that is manufactured in 32 components, one of those components being a plastic grip frame that takes about $4 to manufacture. So Beretta had an extreme disadvantage. So, even in spite of themselves, they took some of the best technology in the world, adapted it, and that was, the BDA 380 and the Beretta 84. They adapted it to the Beretta 92, and it was still obviously good enough to become the United States military's standard service sidearm, in spite of adding 24 parts to it. However, in the years ahead and as other people's technologies advanced, that was had to be a huge disadvantage from a cost to manufacture standpoint, having a 68 component handgun compared to a 32, less than half the parts. And I think we can safely assume that the simplicity of the Sig Sauer, it bears out John Browning's statement that the best gun is the simplest gun. And I'm not saying the P365 is like the best gun among any particularly. If plastic frame handguns are your thing, it certainly has come in at a number of components that we've not seen for a very long time, actually. Very, very few are the designs anywhere that were not original John Browning designs that gets into this range of parts in the 20s or 30s. The original master, John Browning, is the only one basically who even lives in this territory still 100 years later. Which is a profound thing to even ponder, because we still don't know today how far ahead of his time John Browning was in his time. But I think what we can say 100 years later is he was more than 100 years ahead of his time, because today's designers, and with all the computer technology, still struggle to better or duplicate what he did. And so, well, anyway, we hope you have enjoyed this analysis that we did, because literally the total number of parts in a handgun can determine the destiny of that handgun long term. And we definitely see advantages, and this page is frankly much more full of legends than the first page in these among these handguns, many of them not in production anymore when we start getting into that number of parts. And we see a lot of legendary handguns on this page, and in this range of 24 total parts to 44 parts. Thanks for watching this presentation, folks. I'm Mark Allen, BHSpringSolutions LLC, and BHSpringSolutions.com.